All right, so good morning, everyone. My name is Delaney Mills. It's my pleasure to welcome you here to the Inclusive Leadership Conference first session this morning. I would like to thank you guys for joining us today for more than a hashtag advocacy and activism in the new generation, an issue that is becoming more and more critical every day. So how's everyone doing this morning? All right, great. So we are more than excited to welcome our first featured speaker, Dr. Tierney Bates. Just a little introduction on him. Dr. Tierney Bates has established himself as a focused leader, speaker, fundraiser, networker, career coach, and voice on equity, diversity, inclusion, and justice and Generation Now. Wow, that is really impressive. He is currently at UNC Chapel Hill as an assistant vice chancellor for special projects and interim executive director, and has worked in higher education for over 20 years. He's also the founder and chief engagement officer of the Bates Group, LLC, that is a premier boutique consulting and education agency specializing in working with higher education, corporate industry, and nonprofits. The areas of focus include equity, diversity, inclusion training, and workshops, diversity talent searches, speakers bureau, fundraising consulting for identity-based and diversity fundraising needs. So I'm seeing some excitement in the chat. Everyone can see us, can hear us, going great. So thanks for your patience. So without further ado, please join me in welcoming Dr. Tierney Bates.
Greetings, and Delaney, I'm hoping I'm saying your name right, Ms. Mills. Great introduction, great time to be here with Temple Owls, Go Owl Nation. Yay. I'm excited to talk about more than a hashtag, the new advocacy and activism with your generation. It's important for us today to make sure that we address multiple different facets, multiple different things to engage you as students on your own personal and professional journey when it comes to inclusivity. So it's important for us today to talk a little bit about history, where we are currently right now, and where we should be going towards the future. So Owl Nation, sit back, let's get it started, and let's look forward to doing some good things and having some great dialogue. Shout out to you, Kevin. Definitely looking forward to it as well. So let's talk about a few different things here. Let's talk about the history of activism. I think we have to start there first and foremost, because without history, we got to have a past to understand our presence, to know where we need to go from a futuristic standpoint. So if we think about it, all of us know something about or engage with or have a dialogue around the civil rights movement. We just celebrated, of course, last month, the birth of Martin Luther King Jr., the leader of the civil rights movement. We just are now entering into a great month called Black History Month, which Black history is all history in this great country we call the United States of America. And that we should study more about not just Black history, but that from LGBT communities, Latinx communities, Asian Pacific Islanders. All those communities have a history here in our great state. So what I want to talk about is about the nonviolence movement to kind of paint you a picture of what it was like for them back in the great 50s and 60s to lead the charge that we need to be leading today. So if you think about it, the nonviolent movement was a strategy for social change and for resistance, right? So what Dr. King, he got it from Mahatma Gandhi and the whole idea of nonviolence and being able to do certain things to be able to help that social change and that resistance. Now, everybody knows when the nonviolent thing first came out, how would that work? How would that be engaged? So, because again, others were violent, right? We can talk about the 3 gentlemen that died in Mississippi. We can talk about people being beat up in the streets, dogs and hoses being hosed on individuals in this nonviolent way. But we realized when we exposed that nonviolence in 1965, when John Lewis walked across that bridge, and we exposed the cruelty to all of America using what it had at that time called television. You see, television is what you have now today called social media. And so that nonviolence change, those nonviolence that went throughout all of the 1950s and 60s and early 70s was based upon using the technology that they had at that time to address nonviolence, but to address that societal change and resistance. As we avenue through that, one thing I want you guys to understand, our nation today, is that whenever change happens in this country we call the United States of America, It is based upon the youth. You are the youth that will make the fabric change of what we want our country to be and to live up to. So let me paint a picture for you there. The student life and student movement was part of the civil rights movement. It was for students like SNCC organizations, SLC, and other organizations that were founded in that time frame around the societal change. It's like those four brothers that are at North Carolina A&T that went and sat down on February 1st, 1960, and decided not to leave that great table, but wanted to be served. It was students like yourselves right now at Temple University who are understanding that there needs to be some changes at Temple in the community of Philadelphia as a whole, and what are you going to do about it overall? We know COVID has disrupted all our lives. It has showed us that there's a ton of inequities that exist in our society. We also know the death of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Jacob Blake being shot, and the names can go on and on because we just had another brother get shot not too long ago, has to stop and has to change. We know our institutions, Temple, I work at UNC Chapel Hill, other institutions and corporations are trying to address this in multiple different ways, but they're also implementing what I call performative acts. No longer can we implement any more literature, any more dialogue. We need accountability and action. And it's going to be on you as the generation now, as I like to say, to determine what that accountability and what that action will be. We also know that at institutions, inequality regimes exist. Yes, Temple University has inequality regimes. We don't want to call it out. We don't want to talk about it, but we know it's existed, and it's existed throughout the fabric of the institution as a whole. It has existed throughout the fabric of higher education and corporate and nonprofit organizations for years. But we also say that Black lives do matter. Why? Until people really say Black lives do matter, your institution must then now have accountability and action behind that. So students, I know you're facing a lot right now. You're facing, hey, I'm in school, I'm trying to navigate this thing called COVID and take classes either in a hybrid model or in person or all on Zoom. And I know you're facing fatigue. Your mental health is right now all over the place because you're like, hey, I'm trying to afford to go to college. I'm trying to pass these classes, but I'm also concerned about what will my future look like for the career or the ideation of what I want to do for a living will be. We know that also some of you on this call are facing what I call imposter syndrome. You're in a space of, do I belong? Am I supposed to be here at Temple? Do I able to show up and be my authentic self from that perspective? And I will tell you today, yes, show up. Be your authentic self. Be who you are, because they need you at Temple to be able to do that. We also know that we have to face this whole idea of advocacy in the face of inequity. We know that as we go out and as we try to face all these inequities, that there's going to be people who are against some of these different things, but they don't realize that the privileges that they have, some of the things they need to determine, what they do overall impacts everyone. See, diversity is a fact. On this call today and in this room and in this space, we have diversity, right? Equity is a choice, right? We choose to do things from an equitable lens. Inclusion is an act. I am actually including people in this, and this is the Inclusive Leadership Conference. So we're making sure we're including people. But what everybody wants is that B, and that's belonging. And we can't get to any of that belonging unless we address the diversity, equity, and inclusion pieces for people to feel like at Temple or any institution of higher education that they truly belong. We know we lack representation of student, staff, and faculty in multiple different facets. There is no greater time in history, and I'll say this again, no greater time in history that an institution of higher education cannot find talent of color. They're all around. You know what happens a lot of times is we get caught up in this thing called fit. Higher education has its own pedagogy and its own bouginess, as I like to say. And if you don't fit a certain criteria or a certain way, or if you don't look a certain way, you don't belong. We need to tear that down. We need to dismantle that. I am on a mission to dismantle fit and talk about cultural adds, how everyone on this call adds something of value to Temple, to the community of Philadelphia as a whole, and overall. We need to get out of this idea that from the academy, you have to fit a certain model, look a certain way when it comes to this. As I look right now, I look like Frederick Douglass met Wolverine, right? And I'm doing this on purpose. As people are like, hey, your hair is all over the place. Usually you got short cut hair and no beard and all this other stuff, because right now It is about the intellect of what a person could bring to the table, their cultural add, their ability to do certain things that we need them to do, versus me having a curly afro and a Wolverine beard. So it's important for us to understand that moving forward. We also have to understand that not only are you as students going through your mental health issues, us as faculty and staff, as the community members, also are navigating this space. We've had to stay home. I don't know about you guys, but I've had to stay home with the wife and kid multiple months, and it can strain all our lives. What are we doing to make sure that we have the ability to do certain things for ourselves, mentally and healthily, and how are we getting the services we need? I've talked to multiple people over the last 11 months that we've been in this space called the COVID pandemic, and a lot of people have need outlets. So what are we doing programming-wise at Temple? What are we doing programming-wise in higher education that we address the mental health stigma that then can then address how we become advocates and activism and more than a hashtag? We also know that on each campus, we're combating multiple different things. Thank you, Fatima, this is correct. We got to be equipped to disrupt and dissolve student activism. We'll get more into that in a minute. And imposter syndrome is big. Yes, thank you, Rachel, as far as I'm concerned. I can see you guys' comments coming in, so you're fine as far as that's concerned. Our racial tensions on our campuses are through the roof. You have them at Temple. I know I have them at Chapel Hill. I know I have them at multiple institutions I've gone to speak at. But how are we going to get through these times? How are we going to make sure that we build a bridge of belonging overall? How are we making sure that we are now destroying and tearing down anti-racist systems overall? And if we're going to talk about advocacy and activism, let's really jump into it. We know that in the 60s and before that, there was the labor movement. People unified. We know that there's the women's movement, and we've seen the great women's. The reason why 1919 was so important for women's rights and suffrage be able to vote and move forward. We know that we've seen the higher ups have said us from a constitutional standpoint that we support LGBT communities overall. We know that organizations like the Black Panthers, the Guardian Angels, we've seen as institutions, African-American studies, ethnic studies, and women's studies programs come on. We need to support more on those programs and double down on that. All students should need to take an ethnic studies course. All faculty and staff should be engaged with ethnic studies courses. We need to talk about the interdisciplinary things we need to do overall to build these bridges together for our students, for our institutions, and for our faculty and staff. We know that now that for anything to change in this country, it's going to come from you. You, Temple Owls, you as college students, you as faculty and staff, because higher education will determine and help us solve many of these problems. We know that right now, if you're at Temple, you need to start talking about politics and governance. What does governance look like? I know you got SGA, and SGA is doing great things for the students, but what's the true shared governance of students? Because if you guys walked out of Temple today, you would shut down the whole institution. We are here for you. And when we say we are here for you, we need to be about you. And so in that dialogue and conversation, what is the shared governance that we're talking about over across the board? So if I look at SGA as a whole, as I talk to a lot of SGAs, what are you doing around diversity, equity, inclusion, and creating an inclusive atmosphere? Not just we're throwing this cool program during homecoming that's going to be cool, but what are you doing to look at equity design think as a way to implement your programs? What are you doing to make sure that from a funding model, those groups that have been the least and most disappropriated groups too on campus have the access to more resources to be able to do different things to help them as students on campus? Also, we got to think about how we put people at risk, right? We got to understand that a lot of the students who are at Temple who are stepping out on faith and being activists or being advocacy for certain things, something like that, we have to protect them. We have to protect them as faculty. We have to protect them as other students. We have to protect them as a community. Because it takes courage. It takes courage to step out to be an activist and an advocate. It's a lonely road. I know I've been doing it my whole career. It's a lonely road. It's a lonely leadership profile. You're going to have so many people that's down with you. You're going to have just as many haters as you're going to have lovers, right? It's important for us to be able to protect those individuals and understand that they're only doing it for the betterment of the institution and the betterment of students. Otherwise, we wouldn't have what we have at Temple University if other students in the 60s, the 70s, and 80s, and the 90s, and the early 2000s didn't fight for what you have today. And the fight still continues as well. We can't stop the fight. You got to understand, this is a journey. It is not a destination. I think we think that we can solve all these problems tomorrow, but you're talking about over 400 years of issues and problems that cannot be solved in a 50, 60-year time frame. We realize that we got to keep chiseling away at things, that we need to keep chiseling to make sure that at the end of the day, we make it better than it was than what we inherited. We also got to understand that for a lot of you on students, when it comes to advocacy and activism, what are you doing? I'm going to challenge all the student organizations or leaders that might be on this today. What are you doing to challenge about financial aid? What are you doing to raise funds for students who might drop out, who might be on the cusp of not being able to attend Temple University? If you want to be an advocate and an activist, let's talk about that. Let's talk about how we lose students. You can go look up the data at Temple University and it can tell you, hey, we recruit our freshmen and sophomore retention rate is X. So what are we doing? And I don't want to dig deeper into that. Say if you have a 70% of your students going to their sophomore year, what happens to those 30%? And who are those 30%? Are they Black and brown? Are they individuals that are not able to matriculate towards sophomore year, junior year, or beyond? And what are we doing as an institution? And what are we doing as students who are activists on our campuses to make sure we help address those gaps? We know that the number one reason why most students fall out of school is financial aid. So what are we doing to talk to alums, to talk to our community members, to talk to sponsorships and opportunities to make sure our students are getting the needs they have for a better opportunity? We also got to understand that we have to challenge our clubs and organizations as a whole. I say that because we can no longer do what we used to do. And I know this in my time frame in college. I love being part of the different organizations I were a part of and the different programs we threw. And some of that you got to do. You got to have some fun. You got to have some things that you really get excited about and want to do. But what are the things that we know can have a greater scaled impact on all students versus trying to compete and do programs with other organizations and clubs? What are we doing to bring clubs and organizations together, whether they're the Black Student Union, whether it's SGA, whether it's Greek Life, you know what I'm saying? Whatever organization can to have a unified front of how we show up, how we support each other in the times of needs at Temple University, but also in the times of addressing the issues, the gaps, and all the things that we need to as well. You see, young people, one of the biggest things you have the ability to do is affect change at your campus. The question is, are you willing to take that chance? Because we can all walk around campus, go to class, go to the caf, get something to eat, go back to my dorm room, whatever maybe do, and just live our normal lives. But I would question, wouldn't you want to have a life fulfillment of legacy, of impact, of something that means something? You know, I meet more people throughout my field of higher education who, you know, always say when they get to a certain age, I want to do something that's meaningful. And I always tell people, why do I have to wait till I'm 50 or 55 or 60 to do something meaningful? When I'm at 20, 21, 22, I can change the world. I can change Temple University. And that is the legacy that I want you to leave with today. What are you going to do after this great inclusive leadership conference to change Temple University? That's going to be a fight, but it's going to be people who's going to walk along with you. There's going to be people who are going to champion your cause. There's going to be people who are going to walk with you and support you. And you got to understand that they'll be there. You got to understand that overall, for all of us, it is a dialogue that we have to move forward. So let's fast forward. We've had the 60s, the 70s, the 80s, the 90s, 2000s, and here we are in 2021. And America got woke about 8-9 months ago with the death of George Floyd. Like, oh, wow, we've been treating people of color like this so bad. And I'm gonna be very specific. I'm gonna say Black people. No diss to anybody else, right? I say that for the simple fact that America finally saw something that they saw back in 1962, 63, and 65. Why? It was a thing called a cell phone, right? A cell phone that caught and captured the ability of a man dying who couldn't breathe for 8 minutes and 46 seconds. Imagine had we not had that cell phones, this technology that we use today in multiple ways. It is the technology that we have today, whether it's Twitter, Snapchat, Instagram, now Clubhouse, all these other great things that are coming out, to actually have a conversation and address our societal ills. The question, young people, I have for you is, how are we going to use it? Because if I can gather, you know, over 100,000 people in 1963 on a March of Washington picking up a phone, imagine what you can do, and social media has showed us that with social media. Imagine what movement you can use at Temple University to affect change. Imagine the different things we can use if we started at Instagram, Snapchat, Twitter, Clubhouse, just focused on Temple University as students. Trust me, I know for a fact as a university administrator, you'd have caught my eye. We'd be trying to address it and try to support you as students. So imagine who are those leaders going to be? I'm going to challenge you on today's call is to say, who are the leaders going to be at Temple University to bring forth the new generation of activism and advocacy? What are you going to do to organize, strategize, and actualize? I'll say it again. What are you going to do to organize, strategize, and actualize? Because that is the thing that you need to be able to do at Temple University, Chapel Hill, any institution of higher learning, University of Pennsylvania, where you guys are at, to affect change. Now we know that for most of our Black and brown, we're going to have to support them in that effect change. There are certain individuals that are going to step up. Here's another thing in picture I want to paint for you. If you saw the civil rights movement, if you've read about it and you've studied it, it was mostly male-led. But we never talk about the women, right? We never talk about the Diane Ashes, the Georgia Powers, the Angela Davises in multiple facets ways, the Coretta Scotts, those individuals that truly were the backbone, maybe not the face, but the backbone of that movement. Here we are in 2021, and we really need to support the women of color who are leading our current movement. It is not men leading this movement. It is women of color leading this movement. So I would challenge the men on this call to support our women, particularly our women of color, because they need to be protected moving forward, because they are the ones who are leading this new edition of a new, what I call, civil rights movement. On top of that, I've worked at multiple institutions, and at each institution I've worked at, whenever there's been a case of inequities or addressing issues around that, it's been led by women. I haven't seen many men step up to the plate. So I'm calling out my men today as well to make sure that you're supporting our women in these efforts. And it's not a matter of who leads, men or women. It is a matter of support. And I see it right now because women of color are the leaders. We talk about the Me Too movement. Who started that? Women of color. Black Lives Matter, women of color. Again, the things that are happening on your campus more than likely are being led by women of color. So we need to be able to support that. If you're an ally, I need you to become an accomplice. No longer do I need people to be allies. Allies is cool. You still get to sit on the side and say, I support you. I need you in the muck. I need you digging and bearing the bodies with me. I need you to do more than just sit on the side, but I need you to disrupt the systems in your own house, in your own community, in your different aspects that you have, because that's the only way we're going to really address certain of these things. Systematic issues are what we're really facing, whether it's at Temple University or any institution overall in this country. These are institutions of 100, 200 years old and have already need to understand they need to right historical wrongs. They need to right historical wrongs. That takes courage. That takes the ability to say we were wrong, and we will address it multiple different ways with accountability. You see, this new generation now, you on this call today, need to hold my generation and the previous generations accountable for our words and our actions. You can do that multiple different ways. I just told you, you need to organize, strategize, and actualize. You need to say, hey, we're going to do sit-ins. Yes, they still work. We're going to use social media to our advantage overall to make sure we say that all of higher education understands what's going on at Temple University as a whole. We're going to do certain things to say financially, 1% of all dollars at Temple University need to go to X, Y, and Z to help impact the cultural and instructional changes that need to happen at that institution. And if you can't commit 1%, every VP, every dean needs to commit something in their performance evaluation and be judged on that overall. But not only that, we need to look at our staffs and how they are also judged. Because we know we have inequality regimes within any of our staff, and some of them need a little training, some of them need a little push, some of them need a little support overall. But I tell people like this, as administrator, as a staff member of color, as a Black man, I have no choice but to interact with everybody on campus. I have no choice. But those who don't look like me, they can choose who they interact with on campus. And that's the structural things we need to change. Those are the structural barriers we need to have. We need to have more lessons and more people talking about cultural fluency. We need to train staff on cultural fluency. We need to have students challenging us in the classroom, in the academic space on cultural fluency. Because it's important for us to understand that we only can change things if we look at policies, procedures, and different things like that. How we spend our funds, our policies, are things students need to understand. Have anybody, if the students on this, been to a board meeting, read board minute notes, understand what the decisions are making, right? We know we're all going through changes as institutions when it comes to budget, when it comes to making hard decisions overall. I would challenge students to say, if an institution is truly about inclusivity, that they put their money where their mouth is, that they put the time, talent, and treasure into it if they truly want to make an institution a belonging institution. Like I said before, it's going to be a journey. It's not going to be a destination. It's going to take some time, but it's going to be a difference for me as an alum going back to my institution and saying, oh, it has changed. Still got some work to do, but it's better than it was 10 years ago or 15 years ago. And as alums, as you graduate as alums of your institution, I will argue that you come back, that you part wisdom, that you mentor, that you become active in engagement, because guess what? There was this thing called an agreement. I paid you money to come to this institution. You're going to give me this great degree, this paper, all this knowledge, whether it's in the classroom and outside the college classroom, to go do great things in society, whether it's personally or professionally. I want to pay that back. I want to pay that back to people that look like me. I want to pay that back to an institution that gave me a leg up in society. I want to be able to make sure that I affect change for the future generations as a whole and overall. So it's important for you that we got to understand one thing. We have to go from surviving to thriving. See, on most campuses, people of color are just surviving. Now, I know I'm talking to the choir today because there's some people on this call that are staff members or students, teachers, faculty members, whatever it may be. They're saying, you know what, Dr. Bates, you're right. I'm over here surviving. We got to go from surviving to thriving. And it's going to be up to us, not only as a community, but up to us as leaders in higher education overall to make sure we address this and move forward. See, this is not just a commitment for a moment. This is a movement. We need to make sure that we dismantle everything from the inside out, as I like to say. We need people who are committed to making sure this stays at the top of mind, not just another check mark, not just another box to say we did something. See, that's what the problem is. And that's why higher education has not got to the point it needs to be when it comes to this work around inclusivity, because it becomes a checkbox. Oh, we did that. We did that last year. Oh, yeah, we increased, Black faculty staff by 5%. Okay, we need to increase it, keep increasing it, right? We need to keep increasing it. We need to keep striving for these things and not just be a checkbox overall. I challenge you as students today to think about this. What will you do to cross across different generations, different classes, whether you're a freshman, sophomore, junior, or senior? Shout out to the major 21 graduates as far as that's concerned, because you're walking into a world of uncertainty right now. What are we going to do to make sure at Temple University that whatever we say we are as owls, that we're going to live by that creed, and that we're going to challenge ourselves in and outside of the classroom? You see, Generation Now, when it comes to advocacy and activism, you have to develop a platform and a way to communicate that on. I'll give you a prime example, LinkedIn. I would ask all of you, how many of you have a LinkedIn account? How many of you have a LinkedIn account that is fully updated, together, all other great stuff? We talk about the other social media platforms like Facebook, Instagram, Snapchat, Clubhouse is a new hot thing. I just joined myself. But LinkedIn is where people go to find jobs, right? LinkedIn is a great network to find opportunities. Well, I would challenge you. What are the employers who are coming to Temple University doing to address diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging? I would challenge your career service. I would challenge your colleagues, your faculty members. What are they doing to prepare our students for a multicultural world? If I'm teaching sociology or biology, how am I relaying it back to where students understand it, that they can understand why they took this class, that means something from a cultural competence or fluency standpoint, right? So if I'm teaching anything, and I got students on this call today that want to go to medical school, if you don't know about Henrietta Lacks, you need to talk about Henrietta Lacks. You know why? We're out here right now getting these vaccines, And what we really never have a conversation about is how some vaccines and some things that have been discovered from a medical perspective were based upon what we did to people of color. So the medical field has to owe a lot of different things to its own self. It has to own up to some of its historical wrongs. People always ask, why don't we have more Black doctors and lawyers, more Latino doctors and lawyers? And I would say, well, look at the history. You wouldn't allow us. And you think that by creating a school, what we call our historically Black colleges and universities, and then not funding them, yet those individuals thrive. We know why, because we have one sitting in the White House right now, our Vice President of the United States of America. So we got to understand that even when we think through of what we have been conditioned to think around of what is good and what is bad. So I'll give you an example. Many of you on this call today have been conditionally trained to think about higher education and to think about certain things, right? So I'll give you an example of a car. I love cars, car fanatic, all that other great stuff. You got the Benz, you got the Toyota Camry. Now, which one would you prefer? Oh, of course, most of you on this call are like, if I can get a Benz, I'd get a Benz. But here's the funny thing about it. They both have the same chassis. They have the same underneath framework. It's just one which we put that emblem of the Mercedes-Benz on it, or we add a little bit more on the electronics in it that we now just say, oh, this is the epitome. This is the thing. I say that because here's a kicker in the head. Higher education as a whole has that same process. You're in Temple. Temple's pretty well known, right? But you're right down the street from what? University of Pennsylvania in some regards. And when you talk about the Ivy League, people are like, oh, it's the Ivy League. You know what you're paying for when you go to Penn, Yale, Harvard? Paying for social capital. Not necessarily because the same curriculum you're learning at Temple, the same curriculum you can learn at North Carolina Central University, the same curriculum you can learn from North Carolina A&T or from Livingstone College or from UNC Chapel Hill or from University of Pittsburgh, it's the same curriculum at Harvard, Yale, or MIT. The difference is we've created this classism in higher education, right? We've created this classism to say, oh, if you got a degree from Harvard, Stanford, stuff like that, that means something. Think about it. You meet somebody with a degree from Temple, you're like, oh, well, we mean something. We're Temple. You get a degree from UNC Chapel Hill, well, we're the Tar Heels. Yeah, that means something. Yet, I would argue, people from all walks of life, whether they go to a community college, a Hispanic serving institution, predominantly Black institution, Asian Pacific Honor institution, have the same playing field and access as you. It's just that we, as a people, have created a class, right? I'll give you another prime example. The inner city of Americas, right? When you think of inner city, what do you think of? I tell people when I think inner city, I think Black. I've been conditioned to think that. Where I grew up in Cleveland, Ohio, the inner city wasn't Black at one point in time. The inner city, the ghetto, is actually a Jewish terminology. More Jews and Italians lived in the ghetto where I grew up, and from that perspective, than Black people. Yet, and we have been conditioned in our society as a whole to think of when we think about the hood or the inner city, whatever terminology you want to use, it looks like people like me. Yet, I never hear anybody talk about why that existed. Why was that classism, racism, those things put in place? There was a survey that was done one time to talk about what is a diverse community. And that survey was done to a group of people, and it came out that, white people said 80%, 20, 80% white, 20% Black, or 20% other. That's a diverse community. You know what people of color say in that same survey? It's like 50-50. There's a reason. I want you guys to think about this. Some of you went to schools in areas and lived in areas that maybe came from great money, monetary standpoints, and some came from, like we said, the hood. That is structural things that need to be done and broken down. Why? Our own laws and policies in this country were designed about. I tell everybody, go study the New Deal. Now, when we talk about socialism, and people say, oh, we're a capitalist society, but technically we were actually socialists to be able to create the different gaps that we have in societies today. You see, when Franklin Roosevelt introduced the New Deal, it was a great way to get the economy going. Just like Biden and everybody over in Congress right now is going to introduce this great plan to get the economy rolling, get people back to working, get people to spending money, get people buying homes, cars, becoming consumers, because without being a consumer in a capitalist society, nobody can make money. And so money is the root of all evil. And it's the reason why we have so many issues in our country based upon a capitalist society. But if you talk about it from that perspective, you got to understand that slavery was the reason why you have a capitalist society today. And the main reason why people of color that look like me cannot be able to get advancement, because we're so far behind. Had you gave me my 40 acres and a mule, I would not be having this conversation with you today. If you read the book, The Color of Money, The Color of Law, you would understand that for us to be able to break down these inequities, we have to go back years ago. So the New Deal was a program that was introducing public works and building roads and building things for people to have, yet my grandfather cannot go work in one of those unions. My grandfather couldn't go to, as he fought for this country in World War II, and come home and get his GI Bill and move to the suburbs of Cleveland, Ohio, because it was built in the covenants of that suburb that you couldn't sell your house to a person who looked like me. I would beg to say that even in the Philadelphia Temple area, some of those covenants still exist. Those covenants just look a little different because now we put a couple more zeros on it. And so it's those little institutional issues, those redlining, those different things that we've done that keep a certain individual down in a capitalist society. Yet the way people gain wealth in this country was based on socialism. And you can study this because you're all scholars on this call today. You got to understand that a group of people were literally left out, considered 3/5, were second-class citizens as an overall, yet you tell them to pull up their bootstraps when they never had straps to begin with. And it's funny because even in our policies of how we are dealing with immigration, how we're dealing with certain things right now across the country, banks, I can go in and get a loan today, and I make a good salary. They probably still wouldn't loan me to go and say, oh, I got a beautiful home, all this other stuff. I brought $250,000 and start a Wingstop so I can be like Rick Ross and have 20 Wingstops. Yet I've seen people who don't look like me walk in with no capital. I know this because I got a lot of people in banking, and be able to get access and being able to do that things overall. So on your campus, you have to ask yourself this: who has the access? Who has the resources? What are we doing to destroy some of these structural things that have been in place? Why aren't we at a higher percentage of students of color on campus? Why aren't we recruiting a certain particular communities overall? Why aren't we more involved and more engaged in what's going on our campuses from that particular standpoint? Why aren't we having more accomplices versus allies? Because I can have allies all day long, but accomplices are what I really need because they help me break down these structural forms. You see, it's going to be very interesting the next 4 years for us from a political standpoint, because you have somebody like Joe Biden and Kamala Harris in the office, and I don't believe in conservatism and liberalism, right? I think they're one and the same in some regards. What I do believe is in the good faith of people. And hopefully people will understand that we all want the same thing. It's just that, please understand, don't stop me. Don't block me. Don't have laws. Don't have certain things to let me live my best life. We do a disservice in multiple different ways. I'll give you another example of women. There is no way men should be telling women what to do with their bodies. And I don't care what what side you fall on as far as that is concerned, but let a man be told that you cannot have kids or all this other great stuff, or you have to have the child. There will be another riot like January 6th at the Capitol. So we got to talk about that. And I'm going to say this: women run the world. As Beyonce has already told us, they run the world. And we know that because we're looking at college, and most likely at Temple, if I look at my institution, there are more women in college than men. And that goes to say something as well. That goes to say what is truly going on in our society and where our men and how our men are showing up. I think it's very important for you guys to understand that if you're in college, if you're on a college campus, get an education. Some of you might have caught that, some of you might not have. Get an education. Not what they teach you in the classroom only, but the access you have to other things to learn about yourself, others, and how you can have an impact. I think it's important for all of us to understand as we move forward, as we do certain things as a whole, as a community, particularly you at Temple, as Temple Owls, that what is it going to look like in 4 years, in 5 years, in 10 years at Temple? What are we going to do as students to tear down some of the structures? What are we going to do as administrators to admit some of our faults and how we need to move forward? What are we going to do to make sure that we become accomplices versus allies? What are we going to do to make sure that we support our women of color? What are we going to make sure we do to recruit more students to campus to come there? You see, let people tell my story as I stand for you with 4 college degrees. I shouldn't have went to college. I didn't have the great ACT coming out of high school. I was told to go to the Army, go to the military. You know, I don't think you're college material. And see, that's what society does to us. Society breaks us down. Society puts us in a box. You know, I said, I'm not going to curse, bump the box. I'm going to create my own box, right? From that perspective. So it's important for us to understand that when somebody tells you in society you can't do X, Y, and Z, of course we're going to go and prove them wrong. As I said before, somebody told me I wasn't college material, go to the military. But when I got to college, I found myself, just like many of you are finding yourself while you're at school. You're finding what is it that you want to do? What is it that the impact that you want to have? You're finding out, hey, the major I'm in, that's not really what I want to do. But I'm on track to graduate like I was. And you start realizing what your true purpose is. See, my true purpose is to disrupt higher education. Disrupted in the fact that we do some things that are innovative and creative. I tell people I want to be around the Steve Jobs, the Mark Zuckerbergs, the individuals who are disrupting things for the better good of people. You know, the biggest thing you're put on earth for is not to make a lot of money. I don't know about you guys, but I've never seen, you know, a Brinks truck pull up to a funeral and dump all the money into the coffin, right? But I do know what I can do is leave a legacy of impact, a legacy of changing others' lives. So as the great Muhammad Ali, who I had an opportunity to meet, said, you're on earth to service others. You can't serve God. You serve God by serving others. He said that. That was his quote. So it's important for us to understand, what are you going to do, Temple House, of not only servicing the university, but serving your fellow students? What will advocacy and activism look like on your campus moving forward? How are you, seniors and juniors, mentoring the freshmen and sophomores to take over when you leave? What is the succession plan for when a student organization is doing so much to impact the organization and the institution, yet we graduate these best and brightest, and there's nobody to step into their shoes? What are we doing as faculty and staff to make sure, especially faculty, since you have this thing called academic freedom, to be able to have an impact on the greater good of changing some of our policies and procedures to make sure that we impact and have a shared governance, to make sure our students feel like when they show up to our classroom, they belong. For our staff members, what are we doing to push back on our status quo? Because we become creatures of habit. We get older, and, you know, every day I'm gonna walk in the office, I'm gonna drink my coffee, check my email at this point in time. What are we doing to disrupt? If there's any book I would tell you to go out and check out for everyone on this call, Clayton Christensen's University Innovation. It talks about disrupting our field. You know, higher education is a field that is an ebb and flow field. We ebb and flow with our students. We ebb and flow with the times, just like we've had to pivot during this COVID pandemic. And more than likely, we won't go back to a traditional model of higher education. We know that, you know, we've learned that this learning space could be different, viewed different, but we have to keep in mind the diversity, equity, inclusion piece. We got to think in mind of how many of our students are coming to us and are prepared to be able to go home and actually take classes from home and not know what their work or home environment may be. How many of our students are struggling to navigate this from a mental health standpoint? And what are we doing as student clubs and organizations to put something together? We don't need another game night. We don't need another, you know, night where we all get together and watch a movie. What we need is true activism of how we support our students in their greatest time of need. We know students are having food insecurities. What are we doing to drive all student clubs and student organizations to make sure that pantry at Temple University is flowing for a whole year and that everybody has access? What are we doing on our campus to make sure the community we surround ourselves with, that we see people every day struggling, help support them in their time of need? Because that community partnership as an institution is just as important as me going to class. So it's important for us to understand, as an institution, as students, we have to challenge and disrupt. We have to go from surviving to thriving. And for my Black and brown that are on the call today, I stand with you in solidarity. I stand with you in the cause. For my allies who I just told you, you need to become an accomplice, stand up. Take one of these Black and brown students mentor them, work with them, understand that, bring them to the table. We need to make sure that we're all having a conversation together. There's going to be some learning curves. There's going to be some things that people don't understand because you're not in the culture. But that doesn't mean, that is not an excuse for you not to learn. Why? Because we're in higher education. You're supposed to be a lifelong learner. You should be continuously learning from that. As I said before, this is a journey, not a destination overall. I challenge you guys as students on this call today to define what the next 5, 10, 15 years looks like for our great United States of America. You see, the movements we've seen in history have all been led by young people and college students, particularly in the last half of the last 75 years. So I ask you today, what are you going to do when you get off this call, when you get out of this conference, or sit down in your room, sit down at your home, sit down at a desk, and write down what your work view and your life view will look like. Now, so many of you got a plan. Oh, I'm going to go graduate, become a lawyer. What are you going to do around social justice as a lawyer? Are you just going to be more concerned about the billable hours? Or are you going to be able to make a difference? Or I'm going to go to medical school. Well, what are you going to do? Do you want to just be in, the affluent hospital? Or do you want to look at policy of why hospitals and certain hospitals are where they send certain people from that? Or how do we break down insurance? Because insurance is highway robbery as somebody who pays it every month. And then when I go to pay my copay, I'm like, well, wait, I'm not getting a lot for this money I pay overall. Or understand how even insurance even works. Because somebody has to pay for these vaccines that we're all taking and doing and everything like that. So how is that going to work in our society? What are you going to do to write down what your work view and your life view will be to impact change? And keeping diversity, equity, inclusion at the top of your mind. What are we going to do, students? What are we going to do, staff? What are we going to do, faculty? So students on this call today, you are Generation Now. You had a big outcome over the last 10 months with the Black Lives Matter movement. You're going to have a future outcome as you become employed. So when you go to work at a space, are you asking, are you helping change those policies and decisions to create an inclusive environment and a belonging environment? Are you going to create an organization? Because I know I got some entrepreneurs that you want to create an organization that is phenomenal, but addresses diversity, equity, inclusion with a conscience of inclusion. It's important for us all to understand today that as you learn throughout this conference, that you take something away and you do something. There's no need for us to put on this conference today. And the Office of Leadership of Development is a great office if you don't do something after you learn from all the great people who will be with you today. And that's the key. Because you can go back to your room, go back to your desk, go back to your house, and just like I said, study and study to a test, or you can become the test. Now to skip over some of you guys. Because it's important for us to understand that the true testament of anybody is what they do and how they react and the actions they will lead by their life overall. Temple University, Temple House, become the change that you want to see. And you don't have to be a multimillionaire like Mackenzie Scott, Jeff Bezos, giving out money to institutions to see the change that you want to see. Use these platforms, social media, to your advantage to organize, actualize, and strategize. It's important for you that I am relying on you for my daughter's sake to be the change that we want to see. Every generation wants to see the next generation do better, but I want the next generation to keep the conscience of inclusion at the forefront of their mind. I pray that all of you learn something through today's workshops and conference that you'll take back, you'll write down, because I tell people, write stuff down, it can come to fruition. I hope today that even though we're in this great space from a virtual standpoint, that you connect with other students who are like-minded and those that aren't like-minded. Why? Because even those that we connect with not like-minded can sometimes have a change of heart, can sometimes help in another way. It can sometimes lead us to the right path that we all need to be on. Temple Owls, take this opportunity today with the Inclusive Leadership Conference to make a change and do great things. Look internally at your institution at Temple, Look internally at your student club and organization. What are the leadership trainings that that office is providing for you? And then what are the things that you know you need to have? What is SGA going to do? What is your board of trustees going to do? What are your senior leaders going to do to make sure we all make sure the temple lives up to the ideology that you say in your words, on your mission, your vision, and as an institution as a whole? I want to take this time to thank the committee for bringing me today. I want to take this time to thank Temple University for having me. Overall, it is always an honor. And I will say to all of you, let's go beyond more than a hashtag. Although hashtags have started movements, let's start a movement at Temple. We're going to go beyond a hashtag. Let's start a hashtag today for Temple. I'll let y'all create it because I'm not there. But create a hashtag that now becomes actionable items and outcomes. And how do you hold your fellow students, fellow faculty, fellow staff in the Temple community accountable? Let's start that hashtag today. Hashtag Temple accountability. That could be a start right there. Thank you guys for having me. Thank you for being here overall. Please follow me on Instagram, tbates1914, tbates1914. Same thing on all my other social media, Twitter, Clubhouse, all the other great stuff. Let's have these dialogues. Let's move forward. Let's become the activists. Let's have an impact. Let's change and be the change that we want to see. I don't know if we take questions. I'm willing to take questions.
All right. Yeah, I was popping in to say that if anyone has any last minute questions, feel free to drop them in the chat for Dr. Bates. That was great. I'm taking notes and feeling really inspired. But if anyone has any questions.
I'm going to shout out to Alexandria Gurley. No, Clubhouse ain't paying me no money. Clubhouse ain't paying nobody no money. They need to, especially Black and Brown, because that's all that's on there.
I've been like hearing about that a lot recently.
You got to have an iPhone to be on it first and foremost. It's still in this beta testing. Like any social media, it will be turned over to make $1 and also follow you. So be careful, you guys. Social media is getting cursed because them algorithms is true.
All right. Well,
I didn't see anything.
Yeah, if we don't have any questions, I just want to thank you so much, Dr. Bates, on such an insightful and powerful session. I know I had a lot of takeaways about not just being an ally, but an accomplice. That was really great. And the Inclusive Leadership Conference would love to know the audience's take as well. So you guys can do this by rating our session down below. Any feedback and insights is always helpful to both ILC and Dr. Bates. So please give it up one more time in the chat. For Dr. Bates, and don't forget to participate in the games and post on the wall to earn some prizes today. Heard that they're pretty cool. Follow us on our social medias at TU Leadership, at Temple Diversity, at Klein Go. And that concludes our session with Dr. Bates. So make sure you meet us later today for All Talk, No Action with Travis Smith. Yeah, thank you.
I just want to shout out to Fatima that's in the chat.
Yes.
I don't want to assume she, but I'll say she is bringing it on the capitalism and socialism. So
I noticed that also.
We can chat anytime.